I'm so grateful for those who are participating today, and I've felt very, very good and about those who I've asked to speak and to sing and participate. I just want them to know how much I appreciate them, and for the fire department to put up their fire engine to kind of slow the traffic down, and I think the county sheriff's up to the other end, and there's just so many people. I probably will forget some, but I want you to know how much I appreciate you. Our first speaker is Derek Hafen. I've known Derek since he was just a little kid, and he moved into our ward, and I hadn't seen him for quite a few years. They'd moved up to St. George, and then he moved back down. But anyway, he's got that same smile. He's not smiling right now because he's going to have to talk, but he kind of got this side grin. And I remember it well because back when he was in high school playing football, I'm about 8 years older than him, I believe. I think we figured that out. And anyway, my brother Kelly and I think my brother Ken was coaching him at that time, and we went over and we decided we were tough, you know. Been out of school for a long time. But anyway, he had that grin. When I lined up against him, he had this grin on his face. And him and another guy ganged up on me and just pushed me out of the road. And I come back, and he had this little grin on his face. And he pushed me out of the road, him and his friend, and see, he's got that grin now. He's probably remembering that. But anyway, I really think so much of the Hafens, and if he don't tell the story, I'll tell the story about his grandfather. I hope he's going to talk about his grandfather, Max. I hope he talks about him. If he don't, I'll tell you some of my memories of Max. But anyway, Derek.
He didn't tell those stories about the football quite right, but he did kind of tell me what he wanted me to say and how to say it, so I'll try and do what he asked me to do. They headed out that canyon late autumn in the snow. The old prospector and his mule was loaded and traveling slow. He buttoned up his collar and his hat held down like glue. And they headed straight for Bunkerville because they wanted to. He chewed a twist of something that most surely curled your hair. Where do you want me to stand, Ned?
You're fine. I'll just turn it down.
He chewed a twist of something that most surely curled your hair. His long beard matched his still gray eyes with their penetrating stare. He moved with calm demeanor. He seemed fearless through and through. And they headed straight for Bunkerville because they wanted to. His mule was short and wiry, his face was long and sad, he had a way of moving a lot like his owner had. They seemed to fit together and their partnership was true. And they headed straight for Bunkerville because they wanted to. When they hoofed it into Bunkerville, a crowd had gathered. Some cowboys gathered around. They was fresh in off the trail, and they was shooting up the town. When they spied that old prospector, they decided what they'd do, and they circled up around him because they wanted to. One asked the old prospector, "Have you ever learnt to dance?" "No," he said real cautious, "I ain't never had the chance." So that cowboy pulled his 6 gun, he said, "I'm up to teaching you." And he danced that night in Bunkerville, just like he wanted to. Yeah, he danced and dodged them bullets till he counted 6. Then he ceased to dance. He stepped quickly to his mule, and his shotgun in his hand he held. His voice was calm and cool. He said, "Now, Sonny, let me ask you, have you ever kissed a mule?" The young man's face contorted as he pondered his disgrace, and he stared with concentration at that shotgun in his face. He cleared his throat before he spoke. His voice rang sharply through. "No, I ain't never kissed no mule, but I've always wanted to." Well, I ain't never spoke at one of these things, but I guess I've always wanted to. You know, I could tell these, but I think I'd rather just read them so I don't goof them up. My grandpa was a cowboy. I can. He says around the 1st of June each year, as soon as school was out, Max looked forward to the great cattle drive. The Santa Clara and St. George cowpunchers would gather the cattle and push them up onto the forest for the summer. They gathered cattle from Mesquite to Gunlock. One bunch of cowboys would ride over the mountains to a place called Welcome. Another bunch would ride to Beaver Dam. On a prearranged day, they would meet at Summit Springs, and the entire bunch would push all the cattle up the Gunlock Creek to the forest at Bull Valley, north of Gunlock near Enterprise. This was some of Max's greatest recreation. From the time he was 9 years old, he spent much of his time riding the range with his father and older brother Guy. Max's father, John Hafen, owned land and cattle in Mesquite. The land consisted of 2 parcels. Anyway, then it talks about the Hughes family was caring for the land and cattle and were given 1/3 of the calf crop for doing so. Max's brother Guy and later Max made frequent trips to Mesquite to look after their father's operation. And then here's a handwritten note that's from some years later. It says the following quote is taken from Max's handwritten notes about his, anyway, from later on. "My coming to Mesquite was to take over the cattle operation leased by Arthur Hughes and Sons dating back to 1916 and accumulating some land to support the cattle. I came down in the summer of 1928 to go with John Jensen on the Bunkerville Mountain to check on cattle, as the Hughes family had sold their cattle in the spring of 1928 and wished to discontinue the operation. So coming home from Germany in April of 1928, and my father being of good ripe old age, I took over. Then this is some notes of Bird Hughes's, a daughter-in-law of Charles Arthur Hughes. She says, "In the spring of 1916, I rented for 5 years 120 head of 1- and 2-year-old heifers and a few bulls from Johnny Hafen in Santa Clara. I was to get 1/3 of the calves for taking care of the cattle. It was big help to us for whenever we had to have a little money, we could sell a critter or two. I kept them until Max Hafen married and moved here, and then I turned them over to him and sold the cattle I had."